Thank you.
Okay, so the logistics about our A/B testing strategies. So we have Flipper, and we're sort of already aware of those options, but that really gives us it can be a little bit difficult to like flow that all the way through to the front end, and it can also maybe be difficult and not necessarily possible to do several experiments at once. We may just have path A and path B. We may not be able to have like A, B, and C. And how we roll that out is a little bit vague to me. A little like I understand from the DevOps perspective how we will likely do that, but I'm not entirely sure. And also, as we roll that out, being able to like look at the statistics and what we're measuring between path A and B. Like if we roll it out to 10% of users, like this is what we see. If we roll it out to 80% of users, we see a different number. And it's nice to know when those things change. So just trying to get a handle on what our options are. And so Alpert came up with this sort of idea around using deployment effectively. So I sort of like push that forward and open that issue to talk about that. Because we know that there's this sort of canary that we have where we roll out master to only certain users. Certain users are, I don't know entirely how this is managed, but I would imagine it's like managed through the load balancer. It's like, here's the new version that's running on some instances, and we route to that, these users, because they have this cookie present, we route them to this thing. We were hoping that like we were kind of close to like being able to do that for specific branches or different deployments and say,
Right.
like just pick a certain number of users and just set a cookie for them, or like just route them to this like thing, and then we set a cookie to them and like keep that sort of like keep routing them to that same instances. But yeah.
No, so when I saw the issue and the discussion there, I was like, well, all of this is great on the paper, but it's like nowhere close to what we can even remotely do. So I was like, I don't understand what this discussion is about. Basically, with the current state of our infrastructure, we don't have the fine-tuned expectations that you would be able to use. Like we can't roll out a branch only because the application is a monolith. It's like everything goes together. So you make one change, isolating that one change with the deployment is nearly impossible. Maybe with some sorcery we can get it done, but it's really hard. So we do have a canary environment that takes production traffic, but like you said, it is A, cookie-based, and B, path-based, and all of that load balancer-based. So load balancer checks those things and then sends the traffic to that subset of machines. The thing is, like, we also have this fire hose of information going into that canary environment. So isolating even on that smaller subset is really, really hard. Feature flags are the only thing we have at our disposal currently to measure some sort of impact and controlling the impact of that same thing. The problem is that the percentage thing doesn't really do anything, doesn't really work. So we more are focused on getting per path. So basically you enable, like a certain feature for a group, like a GitLab group, but you can do that like on multiple groups and so on. And that way you can like monitor what's happening within there. I don't know if you're aware, but there is this discussion happening where we are going to go away from Flipper inside of our code base. So that's going to change as well very soon.
Can you share that with us? Because that like
I'll ping the person because they shared it with me. I can't find right now. But the point is, we are trying to use our own feature flags feature, and that uses Unleash. And in our code base, we have Flipper. So those two things don't really work together, and we want to consolidate them so that we can use the feature flags feature and develop further. Okay. For that, you'll need to talk with release team, product manager. Her name is Orit.
Okay.
To understand the plan, but I'll try to find that issue for you.
So basically, it sounds like a no. That like we will not and never be able to use the deployments to run experiments. Is that correct?
No. That's not what I said.
Oh,
I said right now, this is
yeah.
state.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
I don't like. I guess I can clarify that we aren't expecting this to function now. But what we want to do is like start putting it on the roadmap so that we have the capability. And this is questions more for like the PM team. So Sam or Jensen, do you guys want to like chime in on that? Like, I don't think that we're like saying like, oh, it needs to happen right away. Even I think what we're trying to say is ultimately this may be a better way for us to do it because it reduces our like the necessity to go back and clean things up. So like we will have this sort of workflow where we and I appreciate like all of the thoughts that you have. So I'm just providing more clarity here. Ultimately, what we'll do is, currently with feature flags, we'll do like here's option A and here's option B, and we'll measure like the two different things. And then after we determine that this is successful or not successful, we have to do something with it. So we'll go back in and we'll try and hand off this bit of code to, let's say, like a team, that could be any fulfillment or something. We say, we found that this experiment was more effective than what we currently have. So here is some code you can run with that and like build out and make it like maybe a better experience or architect it better in a way that makes more sense for what ultimately you guys are trying to accomplish. Or we try and like clean all of those feature, like the various places where we have feature flags that enable like a different path. And we have to go through and clean all of those things up. The alternative, and this is what Alper's suggestion was about, is can we do this in a way that it's just a branch, and then if it's successful, we can say, hey, you can take this branch, merge this into master, like make whatever changes you want to with it, merge it into master, and it becomes something that like the growth team no longer has to manage. To clean it up, we don't do anything. We just leave that branch around and say this was a failed experiment. So it's just a direction that we would like to move. It's not necessarily like a thing that we expect now or need like in a month. It's like, so where can we get?
That can be possible. Like I just came, like the reason why I was late, I came out of the call that the project that I'm driving still, we are migrating .com to Kubernetes, and we are starting porting services. With Kubernetes, that would be possible. Like it would be possible to run like multiple different pods that will have different codes, and you'll be able to like monitor it differently if we label it correctly, right? Branches wise, I'm not really sure whether that's maybe it's possible for it to happen, but right now with our dependency on state, like we have a lot of state, there is this danger of I hope Albert didn't table flip and leave the call. Like, oh, I'm done here. Jokes aside, we have a lot of state, and there is like a real danger that you'll be working, you'll be serving something to the users that is writing a different state than what the other users are having. And I think this is something that we need to obviously consider before we can say like, this can be looked into.
What do you mean state? Do you mean like, because we talked about like the potential risks about database stuff. So like it can only be additive. We can't be changing columns or rename, removing things, right? So only additive database changes for our experiments. Probably the same thing is true for any kind of local storage stuff on the client. So if there's like any kind of, if we're storing something in Vuex, and like making sure that there's no that's appropriately migrated if we need something, right? So I don't think that that's like a major concern. That will be something that we'll take into account. And like, so from an engineering perspective, we'll still have some challenges there.
Yeah, but keep in mind there is another thing. Like, yes, it's that state. So storage, like Git repositories, database, I guess like random uploads that we have, like packages, I don't know, whatever else we have there, artifacts and so on.
Are those
Go ahead.
are those not shared? Like, I would expect the databases to be shared with like multiple instances, and like the repository, like storage. I would imagine that's like shared across all of the running instances as well. Like,
yes, and that's why I'm mentioning that if that changes state and it's like touches something that the other part of the code base does not expect, like we are serving to the users and they don't expect
correct.
to have that change. Yeah.
Yeah.
But then you also have Redis, which is a de facto database for us, even though it shouldn't be persistent. We have a lot of persistency in it, and it affects application in multiple ways. And also the way Sidekick is handling async jobs, so background jobs, you can see a lot of errors for the code that doesn't like get the state correctly, right? So all of those items are very important to keep in mind.
I mean, these are standard things, like you can't go renaming a job or changing the arguments of a job without like migrating it and allowing all of the jobs to process through, right? So I think we have our head wrapped around those potential risks, but I would want to, have our team work with, like you, for instance, to like make sure that we have a process in place that doesn't doesn't cause those kinds of things. You mentioned something about the release database. And what do you mean by that?
Redis, as in Redis.io.
Oh, right. Yeah. Redis. Yeah. Yeah. Like those are all things that we would have to, when you change any of the behaviors with those things, you have to like acknowledge those as you do like rollouts, right? It's the same process. If we did that in master, and we would have to go through the same process, right? So it's I think I personally view that as being the same between like a branch or a master. We would have to go through a process of like release with that. And that's, like, I think what we can do is minimize and potentially not make any changes that would affect that. Because, if I was like, oh, I need to add this argument to this like background job or rename it for whatever reason, because we've all sort of done that. We're like, oh, this doesn't seem named correctly anymore. And then you realize, oh no, that's not going to work. We have to like create a shim. So it's like in any of those cases, it would necessitate us to do the same process. If we merged it into master, or if we didn't merge it into master and we just said this is in isolation, I think we'd have to take the same steps. We like our branch would have to create a shim that says, well, when you call this job, like mutate the arguments and call this other job for us.
Right.
So in our code path, it would be a job that's just a shim that calls through to a different job that may do a different task, right? But I don't think that those are like really common scenarios and what our experiments are going to be based on. I think they're more going to be slightly different UX experiences, or because it's like very user, we're not trying to do experiments for like, does this perform better than this in terms of like CPU cycles, or we're going to be like, this user sitting in front of a computer, do we get better response from that user if they do this interface or if they do this other interface?
Right.
So
with that, we have a tiny bit more options. Well, quite a lot more options actually than like if you're focusing only on that, there is a bigger chance we can do something about it, and probably not immediately. That will require some work still, but it will be possible to roll this out to a subset of users and do some testing. Because what we do with the things that are can be considered state for front end, for example, like assets, various sprites and all of that stuff that we change. All of that is uploaded to object storage before deployment. So new and old files coexist before we roll things out to production, which means if we just have a set of machines labeled in a certain way, we can say like those machines will get this type of packages, and here growth theme, this is how you can test things. But that is going to require a tiny bit of re-architecting what we currently have.
Yeah, and like the issue was primarily about getting it on someone's radar, because the growth team is tremendously new. All of us are pretty new. I think even the people who are like sort of interim, like helping us, are like oftentimes fairly new as well. So, you know, like a couple of months, 5 months kind of thing. So like we're trying to learn it. We're trying to like figure out how we can move this forward, how we can enable other teams while also not dragging them down very much. So it's like,
Right.
if, you know, like the PM team works together to try and figure out how that slates into your, you know, the current priorities, however that works, right? It's just wanting to, like, we don't need it right away. We don't want to add stress to anyone's life. We just, like, we haven't even defined what experiments we want to run yet. So this is not like, oh, we need this yesterday. It's
right.
Let's, like, as we're building things out, like, we saw that there was a canary option, and like, what if we, you know, like, could use something similar to that?
So that makes sense. Like, again, like I just want to like stress that the issue you created there, it doesn't have any time restrictions. It does read like immediate. At least that's how I read it, right? Yeah. So that's why I also like, let me jump on a call to understand what are you trying to accomplish even, you know?
I'll adjust it to talk about like, or like Sam, Jensen, like who wants to run this forward? Because it's like, from an engineering perspective, we put the information out there, and now from like a sort of deployment perspective, they can work on it, or they can like hypothesize how they want to approach it. And then, so like, there's that missing thing of like, when do we want it?
So if I can like inject here and say like how this could be started with a bit more, I wouldn't say priority behind it, because that's not the right word, but more like how can we like start cooperating while we don't have an idea what are we doing here. Right. Is like define like one problem that we want to resolve, one specific problem, like one thing that you want to user test in the next quarter, or, you know, I don't know, however long you need to ramp up. And then we actually work together on figuring out how to resolve that one specific problem. Okay. That you have within the infrastructure and within the tools that we have. Okay. And then based on that, we can use that as a step forwards for bigger items or more of the items and so on. So okay. Basically what we will need is like one fully defined item that you want to resolve with all of the points it touches, right? Okay. Basically, like if we change this, it's not going to touch database and like persistent state, but it's going to change this around, and this part of the code requires like loading a bunch of different images, you know, stylings and so on, and it needs to be served by this backend code. Like define that one problem. Like for example, we're doing that right now with the monitor team, where we want to dog food one metric back to back, right? Like from GitLab.com using our product. And we're trying to resolve, like we are trying to close the cycle that way. Right. And see how it goes.
Okay. Yeah, that like makes sense. Do you know?
Just to add to that, I think that's a really good plan moving forward. And the goal is to ideally have one experiment per team or general idea documented for Monday when we have our group call. So we can add that context to this ticket or to this issue as well. And we can use that to really try and set the bar moving forward on, there might be like 3 or 4, but we could even just stack rank them on which ones do we think are going to be the easiest ones to implement to start, and start working through them that way. I imagine we'll have, off the top of my head, 3 or 4, one for each PM for Monday. So we can work from that.
Okay.
Yeah, that's perfect.
like, do we want to, okay, that makes sense. Can I get an idea, Maren, of what timeline that might take? Like, is that a month? Is that 6 months? Is it, so like if we threw together an experiment, like let's say we want to ship a new onboarding thing for people who are buying a license. So we create a secondary experience for that. It's mostly UX. That might take us a couple of weeks, like 3 weeks to a month. Would that like be somewhat in line with the like being able to say like, here's this topic branch that we're working within, and you know, the PMs are testing this and they have it running on their machines, or we can deploy it to staging and have them test this new experience, and then they like, and like I know that deploying to staging is just throwing like an extra layer in there. I'm not just saying it. And then seeing like if then it's approved, it goes through QA like with the PM team, and then we deploy that to like a subset of instances and route some users to it. Would that take several?
But tell me, for example, how long do you want those branches to be lived, and how? Let me see how I can ask this question. What do we expect is the life cycle or lifetime of that branch and serving traffic to public or living in staging?
So I think you know, it's going to vary pretty wildly depending on the experiment. So something like you know, I'm going to be working on conversions and upsell. So something related to upsell, we may only have to have live for, you know, a few days, but it's all just about reaching significance. Whereas something with onboarding, where we need to wait to see if users activate and retain, that may need to be alive for a longer period of time to ensure that we have significance in the results. So I think at a high level, it could be anything from a day, if it reaches significance, to, you know, maybe even a few weeks. But anyone else, feel free to jump in if they have different thoughts there.
Yeah, and then additionally, like so that might be the lifetime of the experiment, but additionally, there's probably several weeks that that sort of come before the experiment is run. So like that branch might live for a month and a half or 2 months. That doesn't seem unrealistic, given how we might want to approach that. So, and
we also expect that that branch will receive tweaks, fixes, both bug and experiment fixes,
and rebasing master against it like pretty consistently as well. Like so,
I think
so
also
I'll tell you that. Yeah, go for it.
I think also we should remember that there are 4 growth teams. So we're talking about one experiment and one branch living for 2 months. But since there are 4 teams, it's likely that there will be at least one experiment per team that is living in these branches. So potentially, you know, let's say we're even running 2 branches per team or 2 experiments per team, which isn't necessarily odd. That would be 8 branches that are kind of sitting out in the wild that could be sitting there for over 2 months.
Which is fine. As an engineer, like it's my responsibility to manage that branch. Like I, you know, can't deploy it until it's like approved. I can't, like, it's the standard things, like there needs
all of that is great, but the problem is that yeah, you as an engineer, you have to go through those loops, but in the end, the people running the service, in this case, infrastructure team, are responsible for what the user experience is. So I'm going to tell you right now, we have a lot of challenges, so to speak, with one branch that we are using right now to deploy GitLab.com because of the sheer scale we are at.
Yes.
Running 8+ in an automated way, which is not going to require an army of people to maintain and resolve problems, is going to take a bit more time. So,
yes. So I like.
I'll tell you right now, it's not going to be a month. That I'll tell you right away. But having that in mind while we build the new infrastructure we are building right now, is going to be important, because we can start experimenting sooner on a service that might not be interesting for you right now, but it might pave the path for how we're going to be doing this in the future.
Okay. I just kind of want to highlight the alternative, which is what we're currently looking at, is having feature flags everywhere. And so imagine the number of feature flag like branching that we'll have within the application, and like
Yeah.
it will
We already have that, and we are already paying the performance cost for it as well. So we are fully aware of that. But I'm also saying that these things are not really simple to change, mostly because we are a fully developed monolith with everything that comes from it. Right? We don't have a way to clear cut things and like roll them out independently.
Okay.
And that creates a lot of problems, not to mention that the fact that we still have those two separate code bases that we are trying to merge in, which adds like squared complexity, you know? But my point is, instead of starting with 8 branches and 4 teams, let us start with 1 team and 1 minor problem that we want to resolve, and see how that goes and how we can implement that. And then we're going to see like what kind of rebasing merge conflicts we see, what kind of rollout conflicts we see, what kind of problems we see with giving this to users and so on, and build our tooling around that, without excluding whatever solution we want to provide in the future, right? Those 8+ branches and whatever we want.
I agree.
And work through it that way. So yeah, that's something definitely to keep in mind going forward. Not keep in mind in the issue.
I want to provide clarity. Like I'll edit the description. What would you like for me to do there? I want to be cognizant of people's time. Would you like for me to update the description to include like a potential timeline, or do you want me to?
First of all, like I think this is probably just semantics, but the title says aid capability, which is like an immediate action for me. Something like research the capability of, or not discuss. Research is good enough. Discuss comes automatically, and then give a bit of an overview of what you and your team can do in the next month, and what kind of thing you want to achieve in 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, and say like, this is the support we can provide, and this is the support we are going to search out. Whoever it is, right? Whether it's us or someone else, this is what you'll need anyway, right? So define it that way, and then the rest of definition of problem and like the problem itself then is being driven by those items, right? Like timelines and expectations and so on.
I will update. I'll meet with one of the PMs and figure out what their ideal timeline is for some of the experiments might be. So
and for product, it's going to be important. I don't know how you're handling that internally in product, but it's going to be important to give the heads up to engineering that this will take cycles, because, for example, we already set OKRs for this quarter, and planning ahead for the next quarter will be important to come from product and tell us like, hey, this is what we want to achieve and this is what we need support with, so that we can plan ahead.
I imagine that I don't know yet. These are things that like the growth team is trying to figure out. I would imagine that if we prioritize this could be a thing that changes OKRs for people. Like that seems reasonable to me. Because I know product cares about this, so they should be able to, adjust OKRs. Okay, cool. That's good to know.
Sounds good.
Does anybody else have anything to add? Thoughts?
No, just in terms of priority, just to level set. We expect these experiments to lead to a significant increase in revenue for the company, right? So in a SaaS business in particular, it is super important to bring in revenue as quickly as possible, because that compounds. So that means like if we run an experiment that increases user conversion by 3%, if we start this month, significantly better than if we start in 6 months, because you obviously gain that 3% over the course of 6 months, which adds up. So I just want to level set, like, we're not talking about anything too insanely crazy in terms of technologically advanced, but I do understand the product management and engineering challenge in specifically getting this concentrated on. So anyways, I just wanted to level set that like we're talking about a significant impact to the business over 4 engineering teams.
I understand that, but I also want to level set here as well that that specifically the team I'm leading is responsible for scaling out not only the infrastructure, but the velocity of all of the other engineering teams and how they can ship faster and save costs. So it's on the same level of impact. Which one is more important is not my decision. It is the business decision, and it's probably also not yours, but it comes from the very top.
Yeah.
So by defining goals that we want to do, we can easily then change OKRs. It's not a problem if it comes from the top and say, you know, you don't need to migrate to Kubernetes, for example. Fine, we'll be working on this. You know, like, I understand that point.
And there's, just to clarify that, like, if we deem that like an experiment is imperative and we think that like it might take 2 months to implement this in deployment infrastructure wise, we might just do feature flags. We have options. So but like this is a cleaner and probably ultimately better option for us. So it's like, as we do this, we can choose which path we take. And as things become more complex, we may say like, hey, look, we actually want to put this one in master and get that one deployed on like a weekly schedule, or we want to say like we want to be able to make small tweaks to this one, so we want this one to be in a topic branch and deployable separately. So we have some flexibility. Like
we also have flexibility of like, if you want to do it that way, you can always like if you go through all the review processes and so on, you can always deploy a bit faster than once a week. Like once a week is our let's say SLA in this case, that in a week this is going to arrive, but we deploy things daily when necessary, priority wise. So if our topical branch needs to become master, then great, we are already set. You can then follow the rest of the process to get your change quicker and like address things quicker that way. So we have options. I agree.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, and so that just like that's sort of my level setting. Like we have options. We don't need to worry about like saying like it has to move forward quickly. What we can do is evaluate how long each of these options will take and like do them based on performance and what we need. So yeah. Perfect.
We are all aligned then, and cool. I think we are all competing who's gonna do more revenue for the company. So I think we're in for the company at least.
All right, perfect. Thank you everyone for joining. I appreciate your time. All right.
Thanks, Jeremy. Bye.
All right, thank you.